So now we're going to talk about engaged fans. So you've written your book and you've got a second book coming out, but it's going to be 6 months, a year, 2 years before it comes out. How do you keep your fans engaged? That's today's topic. All right, Brian K. Wright, Scott Paton. We're talking about how to keep your fans engaged. And I know that there are people that do an excellent job of that because they keep me engaged. And it's like, but I mean, how do they do that? And hopefully we're going to pull the curtain on that today, Brian.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I can share what I do. And there's no right or wrong. There are a lot of ways to skin the cat. But one thing I do is I have an engaged Facebook group and I post in it every single day. And my last book came out in December. My next book is coming out very soon. And the fact that I post in there every single day and try and create engagement means that that group is ready to talk and share. And when my next book comes out, I already have a fan base that's willing to explore what I've done next. So that's one thing that I do. And even on my personal timeline, I will continue posting about my last book for a while. And I think one thing that can really help is if you have marketing memes around your book. I had my team put together several memes about my last book. And it was, a picture along with a chapter title and a mock-up of the front cover of the book. And there were several varieties of it. And when my book came out, I posted one of those every day for 2 or 3 weeks. And I would just keep rotating them around and I'd say something different about it. And now I still post something once a week, maybe twice at the most. And it keeps the conversation going about your book. Now, if you know that your next book is coming out soon, have some marketing memes to announce the upcoming book that you have. Tease it a couple weeks in advance if you can. But it's a way to keep the conversation going. But one thing I love about having my Facebook group, Authorpreneur Live, is it's full of people who like to write, and it's full of people who also like to read. And so in my group, every Wednesday, I have a post that is Share Your Book Wednesday. And I encourage my members to share the books that they've already done. And so that keeps the conversation going about your book. If you are in book writing groups where you are allowed to share and describe your work, and you might get some sales out of it.
That's a great idea. I like both of those ideas because you're really encouraging people to participate, right? And as an author, I'm really proud of my book, and on and on and on. And I'm in this group, and they're like really, really strict, and I can't share anything about my book. I kind of feel like pushed out the door, right?
Yeah.
Whereas when you say, hey, yeah, like if you've got we're all about books. There's abundance. There's no scarcity mentality here. Everyone's got books. I remember one person saying, there's never one book on any topic. There's usually, 5, 10, hundreds of books on the topic. And you could read 5, 10, hundreds of books on the topic and still want to get the next book that someone else writes on the topic, because everybody has a different perspective and a different way of thinking things through and doing things. And you can learn from all of that different experience.
Right. No, that's absolutely true. I understand that for sure. But you definitely want to keep that conversation going. Because if you're not talking about your book, you can't count on other people to do that for you.
Right. You reminded me of an author that I know in Canada who he wrote this. He's a comedy writer, a fiction writer. He writes comedy, and it's like it's a funny story. It's not a bunch of jokes really, and he wrote his first book, and 12 publishing houses said, sorry, we're not publishing this. Felt devastated, and he thought, what am I going to do? And he said, I really like the book. I'm just going to read a chapter. I'm going to podcast it. I'll have a little podcast. I'll put a chapter a week up. And then I'm going to go back to washing dishes in the restaurant, whatever it was that he was doing before he started writing his book. And what happened was people would listen to, I mean, he just read it. They would listen and this is really good. And his community grew through the podcast, and people encouraged him more and more. And by the time he had got to the last chapter, people say, "Oh, this is hilarious. This is funny. This is the best thing I've heard in a long time. Like, keep going. I can't wait for your next book or your next podcast." And then he took that feedback, went back to the publishers, and they said, "Fine, 10,000 people have downloaded your podcast, and you're getting this feedback. We'll take a chance on you." And he won the Stephen Leacock Award for Humor, which is the highest award in Canada for humor writers. And then he did it 2 more times. And every year or 2, he comes out with a new book. And for the next like 2 or 3, he continued to do the podcast, the chapter. But the publisher, of course, was horrified at that. And they said, "Listen, and he fought for it, because these are the people that got me the success that I have. They're the reason that I'm still here writing. So I'm not going to abandon them." And they said, "Okay, fine. But the last chapter, you cannot release it on your podcast until after the book is released." So we hit them all up, all like, "Oh, what's going to happen?" "Well, the book's out. You can find out."
Right. Yeah. You can't give the farm away before you sell it. Yeah, for sure.
That's right. And I think part of his experience, because the other thing that people think, the customer is going to buy the book. And of course, obviously, a customer always buys the book, but the end reader is not always the customer, because we buy books as gifts.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. My family loves reading, and they love reading Canadian authors because they're all Canadian. And so I bought a copy of each of his books and gave it to gave one copy to one person at their birthdays, and said, "Share it with everybody else." And that's what they did. And they loved the book. So, if you're listening to the book and you like it, then it's like, well, who else? Oh yeah, like my mom would like this book, or my cousin would like this book. And then you buy it for them as well.
Absolutely. You have to think about who your book is for. And a lot of times people do gift your book. I know authors who report that, people will buy more than one copy of their book because the intent is to give it away, especially if your book comes out in December, right before Christmas, or before Mother's Day, or before Father's Day, or before Valentine's Day. If your book has a slant toward a particular holiday, that sometimes can be very helpful, or a gift-giving type of holiday. But yeah, it's absolutely critical. You keep the conversation going by continuing to talk about it, not necessarily hammering "buy my book, buy my book, buy my book." But if you do posts about the thing that you wrote about in your book, that's awesome. And because Facebook doesn't like links that steer you away toward Facebook itself, you can post a link to your book in the first comment and encourage people to see the first comment about your book. That sometimes happens.
Right. Awesome. I was thinking of another type of engagement that I've experienced quite a few times, actually. And that is people who are writing like a business book. They will often be asked to speak at conferences, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a company conference. So, for example, I used to be a store manager. We would have an annual store managers meeting. We'd all get together, between 80 and usually it was just the province. So about 80, maybe 100 people. And they would sometimes bring in a guest speaker just to, change it up. And I remember a number of times they did that, and every attendee got his book. So part of the speaking deal was the company bought enough books for everybody, and then everybody got the book. And then, and now, of course, because you're talking to them like and this was years ago, face to face, there is already the beginning of a strong relationship, right? Then you get the book to read, and now is there better engagement than face to face with your potential fans? Exactly.
And if you are signing everyone's book at the back of that event, it's a great way to keep a conversation going.
Yeah. And then, so how would you, let's walk through that a little bit. Okay. So Brian, you got this great book on entrepreneurs and lessons that they've learned. you're invited to speak at IBM's managers conference, and there's 500 people in the room. The company's bought 500 of your books, and you do your talk, and then at the end you say, I'm done now. We're going to take a break because you know what the schedule is and everything else. And I'm going to be at the back of the book if there's in the back of the room if there's any questions, and I'm happy to sign your book for you, right? So of course there's 10, 20, 30, probably 500 of the 500 people crowding around wanting to ask you questions. But we'll just break it down to like 20 people, right? That's usually been my experience. And they've got the book, you sign the book, you say a couple words to them. Now, how can we keep that group engaged?
That's a really great question. I think sometimes if you have a free giveaway attached to your book, like for example, in the back of the book, you want a call to action. You want to steer people towards something once they've finished reading the book. Maybe a free giveaway to entice them to join your list. Or maybe it's an invitation to join your coaching program, or an invitation to attend an event that you're doing. T. Harv Eker, when he wrote Secrets of the Millionaire Mind,
I was just thinking of him.
Book, you attend his 3-day event for free.
Yeah.
But
there's 2 tickets in the book. There was 2 tickets in the book. Like, wow, $3,000, 4 days. Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. But you can entice people to stay a part of your community for reasons like that. Yes. Yeah.
Like I think, because the reason I asked the question is it's very rare to see, like an author do something after they've talked in front of people, right? Like, I mean, there are pitch fests where they're all selling their coaching programs and that sort of. So that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm really more talking about, there's a conference, you're one of a number of speakers. You've got this book, you're able to work it so that you can get a book to in everybody's hands. Great. What is the, and I know some people say, well, your book is your business card, your book is your sales letter and all that sort of stuff. But I don't see that as something that people do very much, right? But it just seems to be if you're in front of, 500 people and you're not, a science fiction writer, because that's in the case of a science fiction writer, it's just, hey, or a fiction writer, it's just, hey, these are my plans moving forward. Like, here's a little spoiler, here's a little teaser, here's what you can look for in the next book. Comics are a great example of that sort of thing. But if you're if you're teaching people about entrepreneurship and how to be successful in business, then there really should be some sort of easy back end, to not necessarily to sell them on like a $5,000 coaching program or something. I think that's too big of a jump. But join my Facebook group, or I'm doing a webinar next Wednesday night on something that really is going to hook all these people, because this is what you've been talking about, and we can delve into it more. And and I don't know, maybe it happens all the time and I just don't see it, but I did really think that part of keeping them engaged is what happens after they buy your book. And it should be a series of books, which means that you want to, you want them to be thinking about those topics while you're writing the next book, right? Yeah. And
for sure. Yeah. And creating a series is a great idea. I mean, Greatest Lessons is a series for me. We're working on our 3rd one right now.
Yeah, and once you get started, there's always new topics, I'm sure, that are coming up, right? Like, Greatest Lessons from my dad, that was the first one. Greatest Lessons from my mom, coming out Mother's Day, before Mother's Day, perfect. And then Greatest Lessons from Entrepreneurs, and then it'll be. And
I have lots of ideas for more.
That's right. There's no limit on ideas, is there, Brian?
Right. No limit at all. Awesome. You're only limited by your own imagination.
Right. So the purpose is not to write a book and have it collect dust on someone's shelf. It's to write a book, create a community, and then grow that community. And hopefully we've given you some ways to engage those people. And we're going to be talking more about growing your community in an upcoming session. All right. So that's it for today. Thank you, everybody.